Good evening, everybody. This is my contribution to the fifth lecture of Rudolf Steiner's lecture, The Foundations of Esotericism. The title I have given to this lecture in my pencil mark above lecture 5 is Three Bodily Conditions, Solid, Fluid and Gaseous, and the Four Ethers. Now this is quite a complex part of the lecture. There's two parts to this lecture. One is about beginning to understand these, we could call them the four elements and the more ethereal counterparts, and then how that affects our senses. When we come to lecture 9, we will find that there's more to be said about that on the senses than this evening. So, not to repeat what's said in the lecture here, but to give a bit of a kind of a picture about what are the four elements and their various counterparts in the etheric. So the etheric realm is a finer realm of life forces than just the physical forces. We could say that the connection that we have generally to the four elements of earth, water, air and fire are obvious. We may even know about the quintessence, the spiritual, ethereal fifth essence. Steiner actually talks about, if we go to his pictures here of how evolution took place, that everything starts off in warmth. And then as warmth differentiates, it may become fire. Warmth and fire obviously have something to do with each other. But already we have a connection to air and light. Now, I know at present we can measure light with electromagnetic waves and particle theories, but there's also an ethereal side to it, a sense that light is the other half of air, just as warmth is the other half of fire. The evolved things start in warmth, and then they differentiate as warmth, so to say, condenses into air. Light also appears, and then when air condenses even further into water, a second part to it appears, which becomes what he calls a sense that there is an ordering, a rhythmical ordering that we find in chemistry, numbers, the way things combine. Not working. So I'm moving to a better place because it seems that my internet connection is not very good, so I'm just moving place. Sorry about this. That might be better, hopefully get more consistency. So as we were saying, that warmth condenses into light, into air and light. The air condenses into water and another form of ether, which we can call the chemical ether. And then once the water starts to densify further into physical material, we have the physical world. And then he says that we have what is known as the life ether, or in this particular lecture he also calls it the atomistic ether. The atomized ether, I think he calls it in this lecture, where we have the atomic ether. So that is the four ethers that come off the four elements. So fire and warmth obviously are very closely related. In this particular lecture he goes through how we have the physical plane, or the earth plane, the water, the air, the warmth, and then the light, the chemical and the life ethers. And each of those have a plane of consciousness with them. And he eventually asks us to consider how, when we are looking where we can find the life or the consciousness of each of those kinds of things, like the minerals or the plants or the animals, where do we have to extend our dream consciousness to find the inner essence of those different elements. So that's the first part of the lecture. It's a very big area, is to understand Steiner's theories or teachings of the elements. So we have earth, water, air and fire, or warmth, and then behind that we have the warmth, the light, the chemical and the life ethers. They manifest in nature in different ways, and we may come to discuss that. So he then also talks about how we can start to see how these different things have an effect on our senses. And he works with one of our senses, the one that's connected with air, which is our hearing. And he says we have an active part of the sense and a passive part of the sense. So the passive receptive part of the sense is, of course, our hearing. We take things in, and then we can transform what we take in through our concepts and our thinking. And the active part of that sense is the organ of speech. So just as the parallel organ to the ear is the organ of speech through our thinking, he says that we also have to the five senses at this point. So we have the five senses that we know. We have the five senses of touch, smell, touch, seeing, hearing, and smell, not necessarily in that order. So to those, two more are developing at this point. So he says the one that is closest to the one that we need to consider is that the ear and the organ of speech are connected. So when we hear and speech, we can see how we have two halves of one sense. And then he says when we work with the physical substance of warmth, we are developing something. So he says the heart is the capacity at the moment for us to take in warmth. So the heart is the receptive organ of warmth at this point. So the heart takes up the warmth from the outside, just as the air does the sound. And at this point, we are starting to develop an organ within the brain where we will be able to put warmth out into the world as well. And this is known as the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland in the brain is the other half to the perceptive organ of warmth in the heart at this point. And he says, and eventually we will also work with sight. So we have hearing with speech, warmth with the pituitary gland, and the production of warmth. So, and then eventually also sight will follow the sequence. At this point, sight is only at the stage of receiving, but when we can receive things in through our sight and work them through and have an active organ or an active sense putting it out again, will be developed from the pineal gland. And there is an organ which will become active with the organ of vision. So this is very minimally present in the pineal gland. Later it will give reality to the images which are today produced by the eye. So we keep coming back to this theme that the human being has taken things into themselves, transformed themselves, and we are at the beginning of a stage of evolution where we are able to start putting things back out in the world. At this point, we are quite capable of taking sound in, transforming it through thought into speech, and through speech are already partially creative and affect the world around us. But we are now developing in the pituitary and the pineal gland from the heart of warmth and from the sight that we take things in the world, in us, around us. We will begin to be able to develop an active organ. He says the warmth organ is already partially developed and is developing further. We might want to call that the organ of compassion that comes out with us in our warmth towards the world around us, where we can change the world around us. But eventually the images that we create through our eyes will also be able to move out into the world. And you can imagine then what that means if we can move an image from within us out into the world, how we might then also become creative beings. And that this at some point will learn to create out of the interpenetration of this idea of being able to take in the sounds, the warmth and the images of the world into the human being. So he goes on consistently with his picture of the evolution of consciousness, that if initially everything was taken into the human being and we separated out of ourselves the stones and the plants and the animals, and that by taking them back in us through the senses now, we are starting to build the organs within our body by which we can also become creative into the future. So those are the two themes of this lecture. The first are about the four elements and their counterparts in the etheric world. The etheric world is a world that is in a slightly different substantiality than just pure physical. It has life and is far more fluid in its nature. And then this level of how we can start to develop the active counterparts to our receptive senses. As I said, by the time we get to lecture 9, we'll be developing more of that idea of where the 5 senses are in relation to these ethers and the elements, and also where we might go in the future with them. So hopefully you're not as perplexed as I am. I'm starting to wonder if I took off more than I can chew by commenting on these lectures, but it is very worthwhile as it really is the foundations of esotericism. We are having to work with these different things of layers of consciousness and the various ways nature comes into being and the way the human being is integrated through our senses into the physical world, and what we might do. It's a step-by-step foundation in the esoteric understanding of the nature of the cosmos, of the world around us, and of the human being. Slowly but surely, step by step, we're building an understanding of that. Hopefully it's not too confronting for those who are listening. Anyway, that will be it for this evening. I will post the link to lecture 6, which will take us in a slightly different direction before coming back to some of these tasks that we have ahead of us, more complex. Anyway, wishing you well. See you again in a couple of days. Friday, I think that will be. Okay, cheers.